in an ideal scenario, is what is the ideal scenario? I mean, you're tracking sort of the major iterations that your schedule goes through in time and pushing those, basically storing those elsewhere. You're making sure the data is clean and it's in some sort of format, whether it's CSV or
Yep.
some other flexible format that doesn't require external software. Is that the ideal situation?
Yeah. So um, depending on so the thing you have to think about, there's two things to think about. One is the timeline itself. So the timeline is what's the planning, how much time we spend planning, when after the planning time will that plan be operated, and what's the operation window as well, and what's the delta between the end of planning and start of operation. So that's one aspect against the rate of changes in the operation system. So if the rate of change in the operation system is fairly low compared to the planning time and small compared to the operation window, what you can do is have a live system and then have a planning system and run snapshots of your live system and then run planning on that. And when you push the plan to the operation system, the number of conflicts should be small, if any, and then you can just modify the new planning that was pushed inside the operation system as being the operational data. Now, if you're in the opposite direction where changes are super frequent or the replanning windows is small or the time between plan and operated is small, then you need to be much smarter about this. So you could have the ideal solution would be an operational system that can resolve conflicts and track versioning of plans. So it looks at, so one example, let's say next Wednesday at 4, there's a flight scheduled. So now today, Friday at 6, the Wednesday 4 o'clock flight is planned to be at 4 o'clock by this aircraft and this person. But if tomorrow, Saturday at noon, this flight gets pushed to 6, let's say 7,
Mm-hmm.
then when you're operating, you might not know that at some point that flight was scheduled to be at 4 rather than 7. And this is why the previous flight ends like so much earlier.
Right.
So you have new optimization opportunities that may occur, that may appear, or others that disappear based on those changes because it has a massive rippling effect.
Right.
And so the two extremes is super stable versus unstable, put it that way. And depending on which of those extremes you are and the time it takes to run the planning, this will tell you if you should go with two separate systems or a single super smart system. Now, the other thing to think about that is unrelated to this time aspect, um, whenever there's some information that is floating inside people's head, you're missing information in your data system. Whenever you have a capture set of data and information that requires context, so if any random person was to look at the data and not be able to understand 100% what it means, you're missing data as well. So and related to that is like missing data is unfindable.
Right.
So like if you're like, oh, I like the program that detects that I've forgotten to export 5 flights out of the 100, like there's no way we can do that because how can the external system know if there was supposed to be 100 flights but we received 95 whereas there was 95 flights.
Mm-hmm.
So those validation checkpoints can either be part of the integration system, the integrated system, or as part of the planning process itself, as a checklist saying, "Oh, I've exported 95 flights. Is there 95 at the other end? Oh, there's 90. There's 5 missing. Where are they?" And so on and so forth. So there you cannot automate things that cannot be read from a file that you can pass to a new employee that just got its training and have him understand, as opposed to, oh, I'm understanding this because I was there yesterday to operate the whole thing. That's why I know that there's missing something there.
Right. So in terms of current operations, the minimum ideal, I guess, is time-stamped schedules,
Yep.
including both what was planned and then what was eventually operated.
Yep.
And then the next, in some sort of standardized central format that you make sure captures all this information, including stuff that is not usually written down. And then sort of the next step for that is putting context to the changes. So adding some notes or things about why this flight changed, or here this changed from this planning period to this
because
one.
then you can run analysis. And I don't know who I was giving this example recently. I'm like, when problem XYZ happened, we systematically make this decision. And then if you're not tracking all these things, it might be a systematically wrong decision you're making all the time. And you're just doing it because, and then you can figure out that, oh, it makes no sense to make that decision because we can look at the evolution of the plans we made. And it turns out that this decision systematically gets overruled during the operation day. Like the dispatchers will systematically undo that decision. So it makes no sense to make it. And vice versa. Like we never make that decision. This is always what happens. An example could be in a context where you're somewhere between on-demand and plan, like we have with some ground transport customers. You would have routes would systematically be canceled, and like the drivers might know it will be canceled. So once they see that in their schedule, they're like, nope, I'm not doing that. And so it makes no sense to plan for that route because it's going to change so much that they always get redispatched on the day of. So if you're planning for it, you're losing way more time than just leaving it uncovered. Right. If it's uncovered, the dispatch team goes in at the start of their shift and they're like, oh, this thing's uncovered. I need to find someone to cover that thing. And then they look in their reserve or contingency drivers and whatever, assigned it there, and you're done. Whereas if it was assigned to someone, then you need to confirm that the person will do the actual task. The person last minute says, I'm not doing it. And then it goes back in open time, and then rather than have, say, an hour to solve that problem, you have 5 minutes. Right. So those decisions are like much poorer. Right. And to be able to flag those type of issues, you really need to track that history of changes from plan 1, plan 2, plan 3 to operation, and look back after the fact to analyze that and extract those insights.
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing I think that's worth illustrating is we're talking about this from the perspective of sometime in the future you're going to have a third party come in to try and implement some technology, and they need to be able to grasp as much as they can about how things work from that data.
Yep.
But the other thing is, internally, if you're not tracking that data, you become vulnerable to the people that have all this information in their heads. If they leave and you're forced to train someone else, or someone else doesn't have that data, then it all gets lost in the process. Yep. And we've seen that with customers where, their head scheduler, or the magician, as we sometimes call them, leaves, and they're kind of screwed because a lot of information gets lost, and that's a big stress on the organization.
Yeah, it turns out that we often have more information about that than our customers.
Right, and that's simply because we're forced to
analyze that
and dig into the data, and a lot of people don't do that internally, but it's important.
Yep.